What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going through my top 60 wide receiver rankings for the 2025 fantasy football season. I tried to be concise when I went through my top 50 running backs. Didn't really work. Hopefully, we'll do better in this video. If you guys enjoy, hit the like button, subscribe. Let me know your thoughts down below. Who should be higher? Who should be lower? But let's dive right into tier 1 here. Now, if we want to be super specific, Jamar Chase would be in a tier by himself, but I don't want to have a million tiers in this video. So we're going to have Jamar Chase, then a mini tier break, and then my next three, which is CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, and Puka Nacua. So Jamar Chase, wide receiver 1 last year, 23.7 points per game. He's really just like my locked-in 101, where if I'm on the clock with the first pick, I'm taking him. I don't really have to think about it. I'm not debating between a few different players. No one else is like, whispering in my ear that I should draft them. It's Jamar Chase. Pretty much set it and forget it for me. Then with those next three, CeeDee Lamb, disappointing 2024, 17.6 points per game. But this is a guy who has proven to have a very high ceiling, almost 24 PPR points per game in 2023. With Dak healthy, I think he's going to have a really nice bounce back here in 2025. Then I have Justin Jefferson, and I will say with the recent hamstring injury he suffered, I heavily considered moving him behind Puka Nacua. Now, this is less about me being like super concerned about Jefferson, but I do think the gap between Jefferson and Puka is not all that extreme. Like Jefferson's had a very high floor, 18 plus points per game in 4 straight seasons. He was at 18.7 last season. And me being a little bit lower than consensus on Jefferson really has nothing to do with him as a player. I think if you put like everyone in the same situation, I'd probably feel best about Justin Jefferson. It's just that he was on an offense last year that did, produce a lot of passing volume, a lot of, overall numbers from the quarterback position, and he was solid. But now you're going to a rookie quarterback, and so I'm just not sure what the ceiling is for Justin Jefferson here. Whereas Puka Nacua, in his 9 healthy games last season, averaged 21.9 points per game. The thing that has really held me back here with Puka is just his inability to get into the end zone. In 28 career games, he has only scored 9 touchdowns. And Vegas seems to think this isn't just like a random outlier where Justin Jefferson's touchdown line is just much higher than Puka's. I want to say Puka's like 4.5, which for someone who has like an over-under receiving line of like 1,200, that is very, very low, especially on a good passing offense. And so that's what held me back, but I do think these guys are all very, very close. Then moving into tier 2, I actually did make a change. I flipped Malik Neighbors and Nico Collins. Now, if I could just rank them straight on top of each other, I would. I'm really in on both of these guys. This is not me getting any lower on Nico Collins. It's just a really tough call between these two options. Neighbors, 18.2 points per game, wide receiver 7 as a rookie. He led the NFL in target share. He did that with just awful quarterback play. And now the quarterback play isn't going to be amazing this season, but I do think he pretty much has like upgrades across the board. He played with like 3 different quarterbacks last year. I think all 3 this year are an upgrade if you want to compare each of them compared to the 2024 season. And then everything we're hearing out of training camp is just him continuing to get peppered with targets. So I think he's still going to be heavily targeted in a potentially a better offense. I think he could have more big play upside. And so maybe that comes through, but he's just so talented. What he did as a rookie, I want to be in on him in year 2. Then for Nico Collins, like I said, still very, very high on him. Averaged 22.7 points per game through 4 weeks before that hamstring injury. Even, with somewhat underwhelming production when he came back, he has still logged back-to-back 17-point-per-game seasons. I feel like it's just a matter of time before Nico Collins has that huge year and kind of breaks into that 18, 19, 20-plus point per game area. Then we're going to go with Amon-Ra St. Brown, and I think he has a very high floor. Last 2 seasons, 20.7, 18.6 points per game. I don't know if he's ever going to be that guy that's hitting like a Jamar Chase, CeeDee Lamb level season of like 23 points per game, but like back end of round 1, I don't really think you need that. Like if he comes in here, hits 18 points per game, I think you feel pretty good about it. And then the last guy in this tier, Brian Thomas Jr., wide receiver 12 as a rookie, last 6 games, 22.9 PPR points per game. He's now going to have a healthy Trevor Lawrence heading into the season, Liam Cohen at head coach. I'm very bullish on this Jaguars offense, and I think BTJ is going to have a really strong year too. Now moving into tier 3, I've actually moved A.J. Brown up a few spots. Now, my kind of gripe here with A.J. Brown, nothing to do with him as the player. It's just been his situation where we've kind of seen what his ceiling is here with the Eagles, or at least, what we've gotten from 3 seasons. And he's put up 17.6, 17, and 16.7 points per game. Now, I think I can make a strong case that A.J. Brown is a potential top 3 wide receiver in the league. He's just been on this very low passing volume team and hasn't had the opportunity to put together these nuclear seasons, but I'm kind of coming around to him being a potential handcuff for Saquon Barkley, where obviously normally a running back handcuff is going to be the backup running back. But if Saquon happens to go down, which I'm not saying is like a super likely outcome, but like this would be the peak for A.J. Brown. If Saquon gets hurt, they're obviously not going to run the ball as much as they would have with Saquon, with like Will Shipley and an A.J. Dillon back there. And so if this team does go more pass heavy with the efficiency we have seen out of A.J. Brown, it is very possible he puts together a 20-plus point per game season. And so his upside is almost relying on his running back getting hurt, which isn't amazing. But if you draft A.J. Brown in the second round and he delivers 17 points per game, like, yeah, that's not going to win you your league, but you're certainly not going to feel bad about it. And so then when I compare him to guys like Drake London and Ladd McConkey, yeah, you can make the case that maybe in, more pass-heavy offenses, those guys could have higher ceilings, but man, just talent for talent, I ended up having a tough time actually hitting the draft button on a guy like Drake London or Ladd McConkey over A.J. Brown, and that is not an indictment on those next two, London and Ladd. It's just that A.J. Brown is so unbelievably good, and I kind of just want to bet on that player. Then for Drake London, proved to be a fringe wide receiver one last year, 16.5 points per game. Could definitely see him take a leap here. Michael Penix, full season as the starter. Then Ladd McConkey, wide receiver, 16 points per game last year. Last 7 games, averaged 18.7 points per game. Would like to see this Chargers offense be a little bit more pass heavy. Ladd is still their clear-cut wide receiver 1. Then going to go with T. Higgins here, wide receiver 5 last year at 18.5 points per game. Now that is probably pretty close to his peak, but he's still going to be, a top 2 weapon on a top tier offense, playing with a defense that's probably going to give up a lot of points, where they're going to be in a lot of these shootouts, and that's obviously going to be great for T. Higgins. And then I finally made the move and bumped Tyreek Hill up into this tier. I understand the risks. He's 31 years old. He's coming off a season where he averaged 12.8 points per game, was the wide receiver 32. But this dude is 1 year removed from putting up over 23 points per game. I'm willing to buy into the excuses that it was his wrist injury and the Tua injuries, which is why he suffered. Now, maybe that's coping and he's just on the downside of his career. That's certainly possible. But when we're talking about the risk reward, you could be drafting a top 3 wide receiver, potential wide receiver 1, if he's healthy, in like the 3rd round. And at that price, I'm just going to have to take the swing. Now, moving into tier 4, this is actually a tier where there has been some decent shakeup. I'm going to start off this tier with Davante Adams. I have moved him up a few spots. Now, there's still the concern of an aging wide receiver, potential fall off, but he has still been ultra productive over the last few seasons. He's going to a Rams offense that has done a really good job of supporting 2 wide receivers. Like Cooper Kupp was still a very solid fantasy option, despite it really seeming like he's kind of washed at this point and nowhere close to his prime. So you bring in Davante Adams, who I think is a much better wide receiver than last year's version of Puka Nacua. I think he could have a monster season, and I think we could realistically see both Puka and Davante Adams be fantasy wide receiver 1s. Then someone who I moved up a ton here, it is Xavier Worthy. Now, admittedly, it does feel a little bit scary ranking Worthy this high because I am putting him ahead of wide receivers who I think are just straight up better than him or just like way more proven. But with the potential Rashee Rice suspension, I feel like it's tough to not see the upside here with Xavier Worthy, where overall, kind of a frustrating rookie season, didn't really deliver fantasy-wise, but he had a really nice breakout to end the year, and then he was ultra productive in the playoffs. So we at least got something to say like, all right, this dude, might be something here in the NFL. And the concern with Rashee Rice coming back was that, he was going to command a lot of volume. He was going to be the number 1 weapon. But I never really viewed Rice as like an elite talent. It was more that he had like this elite role within the offense and the guy who was going to get a lot of these easy manufactured touches. The fact that he might miss significant time in the season, especially early on, now that just opened things up for Xavier Worthy to continue to build on what he did last year and kind of take some of those very valuable opportunities. And so you're looking at potential wide receiver 1 for the Chiefs, year 2 leap on a potential bounce back here from the Chiefs offense that has been underwhelming over the last couple of seasons. And like, yeah, maybe in different years you wouldn't take him this high, but I look at some of the other guys within this tier, and it's like if I whiff on Worthy, I don't feel like I'm passing up someone who's going to be a mid to high end wide receiver 1. Like I feel like I'm looking at a lot of kind of higher floor, lower ceiling options. And so I'm kind of willing to pass on those guys for someone who I do think has a much higher ceiling in Xavier Worthy. Now getting into more of like those floor options, we have Garrett Wilson. So he's logged 3 straight 1,000-yard seasons, but has still not hit 14.8 points per game. But you can kind of talk yourself into him being, the number one target on, a not great passing attack, but he should be the focal point. And so it's like talented player, clear number one. Justin Fields has supported a fantasy wide receiver one in DJ Moore, and so that's kind of the case for Garrett Wilson. Then I have JSN, who had a really strong finish to last season. Last 9 games, 18.2 points per game. The problem is, it's tough to see him just, completely building on that or just, banking on him building on that because everything around him is different. New offensive coordinator, new quarterback, new group of weapons. And so it's it's good that he flashed that he can be a decent player and put up some solid fantasy production, but there's just not a lot of consistency going from 2024 to 2025, or continuity is the better word. And then their big signing of bringing in Cooper Kupp to, be the next wide receiver there. I just don't think these guys have complementary skill sets. And it's however you're going to use the one, I think the other one's going to be playing in a position that's not super comfortable or that's not really optimizing their skill set. And so that's just not great here with JSN. Then I'm going to go with Mike Evans, super consistent, 15 plus points per game in 7 straight seasons. He is just getting up there in age, 32 years old. And some point it's going to be the season where he does not hit 1,000 yards. And it just gets more and more likely the older he gets. So sure, he could come in here, turn in another wide receiver 10 season. I think he's done that in 3 of the last 4. But if I whiff on a Mike Evans wide receiver 10, I'm not really going to be kicking myself. But I'm fine drafting him, just not as a wide receiver 1. Then I have Marvin Harrison Jr. I've seen some people really in on him for this year 2 breakout. I do think he's going to be better, but I don't think we can just throw away everything that happened in year 1. He didn't command volume at a high level. He wasn't efficient on the volume he did command. And it's I just don't really think he has that skill set of a Malik Neighbors in that same draft class, even a BTJ where we didn't really know he had it, but he does. Where Marv is not someone you want to get these quick manufactured touches to. He just doesn't really have it after the catch like some of those other dudes. And so I do think he's going to be better, but I'm also not extremely bullish that he's just going to leap into wide receiver 1 territory. And then the last guy in this tier is going to be Terry McLaurin, someone who I just don't have a ton of interest in hitting the draft button on, where it's I'm rarely ever in a spot where he's on the clock and he's my best player available. So he averaged 15.8 points per game last year, solid season, wide receiver 15. The issue is that he really hit in the touchdown department. 13 touchdowns. That was second most at the wide receiver position, and he still wasn't able to get to a wide receiver 1 spot. Now we have him with a contract dispute with the Commanders, and so it's the upside's not really there. I think he probably settles back in as more of a mid to back end wide receiver 2 option. Now moving into tier 5, pretty large tier here, mix of some veterans, some young players, some rookies. We're going to start off with Teteroa McMillan. I want to buy in on these rookies, especially the round 1 guys. He's a top 10 pick. These dudes carry a lot of upside. Wide receiver 1 here for the Panthers. Then I have DK Metcalf, someone who I've kind of been out on over the last few seasons, but the price has kind of become a little bit more reasonable. Wide receiver 1 for Aaron Rodgers. He's been a top 24 wide receiver in points per game in 4 of the last 5 years. If I can get him in that fringe wide receiver 2 range, I think that's a very fair price tag. Then I have DJ Moore, admittedly someone who I just don't really want to hit the draft button on. I have in a few spots. It just doesn't feel great. I'm kind of just much more interested in buying the cheaper weapons. So Luther Burden, Colston Loveland, even a Dunze who's going to be going, a few rounds later. And it's the vibes haven't been great. You've got the body language stuff, Ben Johnson kind of publicly calling him out. And then you just have the fact that this new coaching regime comes in, brings in Luther Burden, who has a very complimentary skill set. Now, Burden hasn't been able to get on the field at all, which is probably a good thing for DJ Moore, but also Colston Loveland. And so it doesn't feel super secure, but I do think he's a talented player. And so, yeah, it could definitely pan out for him. Then I have Jalen Waddle, very high on Waddle. Previous 3 seasons before his disappointing 2024, wide receiver 15, 21, and 12 in points per game. I am expecting a bounce back this season out of Waddle. Then I have George Pickens, someone who I've definitely moved up a few spots. I'm just kind of really buying into this Cowboys like 1-2 punch at wide receiver with CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens. I did a video a few weeks ago talking about guys who are drafted as wide receiver 3s or later, who I think could end up as wide receiver 1s, like top 12 guys. And I did talk about George Pickens, where we have seen these offenses that can support 2 top 12 fantasy weapons. I think that could be the Cowboys here, with Pickens kind of getting the number 2 attention, still being able to win down the field, but they've talked about moving him around, kind of unlocking more out of his skill set. All of that I think is really fun for George Pickens. Then this is where I've dropped Rashee Rice to, and the suspension, not knowing when he's going to get hit with it, not knowing the duration of it, obviously makes things tough to kind of navigate here. The problem for Rashee Rice is that I was very in on him, especially when it looked like his suspension was going to happen in 2026. But something that I don't normally do a lot at wide receiver, I was very in on his situation. I wasn't quite as bullish on the player. So I'm like, Rashee Rice operating within this specific role of the Chiefs offense is extremely valuable. Now that that role is up in the air, I don't have this extreme confidence in Rashee Rice as a player, where if Xavier Worthy's mixing in there, if Jalen Royals is mixing in there, like I don't have the confidence that Rashee Rice is so amazing that he's going to come back in and just have this role on lock. And so that's the concern. Now, you obviously still have the upside where maybe this is a 3-game suspension and, he's not that out of the loop when he comes back in, but I think this is kind of a fair spot in like the fringe to early to mid wide receiver 3 area. Then I'm going to go with Devonta Smith, super safe pick. Last 3 seasons, wide receiver 15, 20, 14 points per game. Just going to have capped upside if everyone's healthy around him. Then for Travis Hunter, obviously a super unique situation. I know some people are going to be very in on him. Some people are out. This is kind of the spot where I'm willing to take the swing, where the 3 guys I have behind him, Zay Flowers, Courtland Sutton, Jamison Williams. If I miss on Travis Hunter, I don't feel like missing on a Flowers, Sutton, Jamo is going to sink my season. And so I'm willing to bet on Travis Hunter being an elite talent, having like a late season Amon-Ra kind of run. And I'm fine taking on the potential risk of him mixing in on defense, maybe not having a full offensive workload. I just think this is kind of the spot where the risk is worth the reward. Whereas like Devonta Smith, not going to be the highest ceiling guy, but like you could still be passing on just a very established wide receiver 2. Whereas for these other guys, it's probably like higher end season. They're in like the fringe wide receiver 2 area. Then Zay Flowers here, he's been the wide receiver 31 and 32 in back-to-back seasons. You're kind of just hoping he takes a year 3 leap here, but number 1 weapon for Lamar Jackson, this Ravens offense, pretty good spot to be in. Then I have Courtland Sutton, wide receiver 24 in 2024. You have Bo Nix heading into year 2. Right as I'm recording this, he just signed a new extension, I believe, so that's good. No contract issues. And then, the Broncos have some young weapons, added a few players like Pat Bryant, Evan Ingram, RJ Harvey, but no like dominant receiving option who's really going to, challenge Courtland Sutton to be the wide receiver 1. And then lastly in this tier, I have Jamison Williams. I'm sure some people are going to have him higher. I just kind of struggle to see the vision of him finishing much better than he did last year. Like he was the wide receiver 23 in points per game. He was super efficient, hitting the touchdown department. I just don't know if he's ever going to command enough volume to be more than like peaking as like a back end wide receiver 2, which is why I have him, towards the bottom of this tier. Now moving into tier 6, going to start off with Chris Olave. I know some people are out on Olave. This is kind of the spot where I'm just willing to bet on the talent. Like this is a dude who in his first 2 seasons was the wide receiver 25 and wide receiver 19 in points per game, and did that in kind of like suboptimal offensive situations. Concussions, obviously a huge concern. This is probably not going to be a good offense, but I'm just a believer in the talent of Chris Olave, and at some point, that talent does have to win out. Then I have Calvin Ridley. Do think I moved him up a couple of spots here. Coming off back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons, has been the wide receiver 27 and 36 in points per game. He does get a big quarterback upgrade. Calvin Ridley kind of strikes me as the type of player where you're not going to regret drafting him where you pick him, but it's also probably not going to be a home run pick. Now, I know he has been a fantasy wide receiver 1, but that was a long time ago before the whole gambling thing, all of that stuff. And so, Cam Ward comes in, plays well. Yeah, Calvin Ridley could be a wide receiver 2, but I'm not really seeing much peak past that. But at this range, like that's totally fine for upside. Kind of a similar situation here with Jacoby Myers. He's been a top 36 wide receiver in 4 straight seasons. He's been top 24 in back-to-back years, and he's getting a quarterback upgrade. It does kind of seem like one of these players where it's like you just don't really think he's going to continue to put up this production, but he does. And like I know Brock Bowers is there. He is going to be the number 1 pass catcher on this team, but it's tough to just not see the back-to-back, top 24 finishes. He's getting a legit quarterback upgrade. Like I feel like he's probably going to perform at this level or outperform where I have him ranked. Then going to go with Rome Odunze. Rough rookie season, but he's still a top 10 pick. Very talented guy, definitely a prime candidate to be a year 2 breakout, even though the indicators after year 1 aren't great. Then I have Jerry Jeudy here, and this is an interesting mix of like a player who I do think is talented, mixed with a situation that is pretty awful. So last season caught 90 passes for over 1,200 yards, 4 touchdowns. The problem is just that he was borderline unplayable without Jameis Winston, only 9.3 PPR points per game. I think you're probably hoping within this quarterback battle that Joe Flacco somehow wins and just goes and slings it like he did with the Browns like a few years ago, because like he supported David Njoku. Like that could be more fun, but you got 4 guys in the mix. The quarterback play likely is not going to be great. And even if you do get some stretches of Flacco, it's probably not going to be for the full season. Then I'm going to go with Jawan Jennings, and he is someone who I think I moved down due to this calf injury he's dealing with. So this is the second calf injury he suffered this offseason. I think he was kind of fun where he was the wide receiver 25 in points per game. That includes games where he wasn't operating as a full-time wide receiver. And so you look at the wide receiver room like Brandon Ayuk coming off of an injury, doesn't have a return timetable. Ricky Pearsall, like kind of unproven. So he could have been the clear wide receiver 1, but second calf injury, something to definitely monitor, and reason why I'm kind of holding him back here a little bit in the rankings. Now, kicking off tier 7, I'm going to start off with Stephon Diggs. Obviously, there's concern with him coming off the torn ACL, but he's gotten some really solid reports out of Patriots camp. And if he is fully healthy heading into this season, I think the situation is pretty solid here. Wide receiver 1 on an ascending offense. I do believe in Drake May, and Stephon Diggs looked pretty decent early on last year, so someone who I have moved up a few spots. Next up, I have Josh Downs, and I'm just very in on Josh Downs. If you watch some of my other videos, he is just one of my guys this season. He's honestly been one of my guys. Like I really liked him as a prospect. Surprised he fell to round 3. This was a guy who was a wide receiver 28 in points per game last year. He had the 6th highest target rate, 19th in target share. And yeah, you can make the case like crowded group of weapons, not great quarterback play, but you could have said the same thing last year. And Josh Downs still commanded volume, still produced. And with the quarterback situation this year, I do think it's going to be better because either you're going to have Anthony Richardson, who looks a lot better, or he's going to get benched or not even start. And it's going to be Daniel Jones, who will at least be able to try to distribute the ball, which could help Josh Downs. So I think he's a talented player. I'm not going to pretend like the situation is amazing. Like it's an objectively bad passing attack to be in, but this is a bet on the player here, and I do believe in Josh Downs. Then I have Khalil Shakir. High floor, just super low ceiling. Wide receiver 33 last year in points per game as Josh Allen's wide receiver 1. Now I've officially made the move to put Emeka Egbuka above Chris Godwin. I know people aren't going to like this. Some people just hate Egbuka being drafted highly because of the target competition, but I'm completely bought in. He has received rave reviews out of camp. Like Baker has brought him up out of nowhere multiple times to just talk about how much of a stud this guy is. I also just don't trust the health of Chris Godwin. He had that second ankle surgery this offseason. We don't know if he's going to be ready week 1. He's not practicing yet. And while he's not practicing, Emeka Egbuka is balling out, just winning over pretty much everyone on this Bucs staff and, the overall players who are around him. And then you have Mike Evans, who's 32 years old. So there was the pathways for him to get on the field where there are injuries like a Chris Godwin. Mike Evans has been banged up over the last few seasons. But then there was also the path that Emeka Egbuka is just so good that he is undeniable. And I think we're kind of approaching the spot where both of those are colliding, where Emeka Egbuka is clearly very good, he's very talented, and he's got the injury opportunity where Chris Godwin is unable to practice. And so I have made that flip. Like when I'm on the clock, I do just want Emeka Egbuka. Then I'm going to go with Jordan Addison. This might seem low considering his finishes last couple of seasons, like wide receiver 30 and wide receiver 22. The issue is just that he has been so touchdown dependent, like 19 total touchdowns over the last 2 seasons. And so it's like, Maybe he's just someone who's always hitting in the touchdown department, but I think with a rookie quarterback, you have Justin Jefferson, you have TJ Hawkinson. I just don't want to bank on that. And if he's not hitting in the touchdown department, I just don't think he's anything, super special fantasy wise. Then I do have Chris Godwin. It is tough to have him this low because he was the wide receiver 2 in points per game when he was healthy last year. Like through 7 games, a solid sample size, he was killing it. But we're looking at 2 ankle surgeries. Mike Evans still very good. Emeka Egbuka, big believer. And we don't know if he's going to be ready week 1. And then if he does play week 1, we have no idea, when he's going to be 100% or even close to it. Then I'm going to go with Ricky Pearsall. Some people were spooked by him starting off on PUP. Seems like that was a non-factor back at practice from that hamstring injury. Really didn't do a ton as a rookie, but last 2 games, 8 for 141 and a touchdown, 6 for 69 and a touchdown. So you're pretty much just betting on him having a nice year 2 breakout, obviously getting the full ramp up period, not getting shot this offseason. And also, just this entire group of weapons for the 49ers seems somewhat volatile, where you've got George Kittle kind of getting up there in age, CMC, major injury concerns, Ayuk coming back from injury, Juwan Jennings contract now also banged up. And so, Pearsall could be the guy that emerges as a super nice pick. Then I have the Packers wide receivers back-to-back, Jaden Reed, Matthew Golden. I do think Jaden Reed's going to get slept on this season. I think some people think Matthew Golden's just going to completely bypass him, and he might, but I think Jaden Reed has just proven that he is a very good NFL player. He was the wide receiver 26 in points per game as a rookie. He was very efficient last year. He was 15th in yards per out run, or top 15 in yards per out run, yards per target, and yards per reception. Matthew Golden, round 1 wide receiver pick, does get the advantage of, stepping into a pretty wide open group of weapons on a very solid offense. The issue is just that I'm not a massive believer in his talent. I think he'll be a good player, but I don't know how much fantasy upside he's going to have. I don't know how much volume he's going to command. And we know the Packers really like to, mix up these wide receivers. It's been frustrating, the snap shares these guys have been getting over the last few seasons. After Golden, I'm going to be going with Deebo Samuel. Now, very disappointing 2024. Wide receiver 36, 10.2 points per game, but it was a very injury-riddled season. He's still going into age 30 season, which is not great, but maybe he gets revitalized here as the wide receiver 2 for the Commanders. Then I have Darnell Mooney, another wide receiver 2. Wide receiver 34 in points per game last year. Not a ton of upside, but someone who could be drafted as a very solid flex play, potentially, later than he should. Then we have Michael Pittman, very disappointing in 2024, wide receiver 44 in points per game, but he played through a pretty bad back injury. In the previous 3 seasons, he had been a top 22 wide receiver in all 3 of those in points per game. And then the last guy in this tier, Jaden Higgins, early round 2 pick, potential wide receiver 2 here for CJ Stroud. Believer in Stroud, think this will be a solid passing attack, and Higgins could emerge as a very solid number 2 option. And then the final tier here, tier 8, we have Trey Harris, Brandon Ayuk, Luther Burden, Cooper Kupp, Kyle Williams, Keon Coleman, Rashid Shaheed, Christian Kirk, Hollywood Brown, and Rashad Bateman. So touch on the rookies first here. Trey Harris, with Mike Williams retiring, just really opens up that X wide receiver role for him to step in, be the week 1 starter. Luther Burden, him not being on the field is a real bummer, but I still find myself drafting a lot of him. Just a talented player. He was, one of the handpicked weapons from this new coaching staff. And then Kyle Williams, wide open Patriots wide receiver room, super fun, dynamic player, someone who I do think could be involved in year 1. Then we have Brandon Ayuk. This is just injury concern where they don't really have a clear timetable for him. It is kind of a crowded group of weapons. And so it's if he gets back sometime during the season, is he actually going to be effective in this first year back? Cooper Kupp, I just feel I'm pretty out on him. I think his production looked a lot better with the Rams just due to the McVay system, how he kind of gets those guys open. But I feel he's kind of a shell of his former self, and I'm just not seeing a lot of upside with the Seahawks. Keon Coleman, I know some people are very in on him. I'm not necessarily out on Keon Coleman as a player. I'm kind of just out on his situation with the Bills, where I'm fine drafting him as a late round dart. I'm not going to say he's a bad pick, but they just want him to be this outside X receiver, and I just don't think that's his skill set. And there's just not really a path for him playing inside when you have, Khalil Shakir, Dalton Kincaid, you have Elijah Moore, you have Curtis, you have a million dudes who could be playing in the slot, and they clearly don't want Keon Coleman in there. Rashid Shaheed coming off a season-ending knee injury, but really showed some flashes last year. Christian Kirk, probably a little bit washed up, but going to the Texans could, operate in the slot there. Hollywood Brown obviously just, had his season nuked by injury in 2024, but was somewhat interesting as like a dart last year. And now he's just going way cheaper, despite potentially being the same player. Also, Rashee Rice injury could help him out. And then Rashad Bateman. I really like Bateman. Actually had a decent year in 2024. Don't know how fantasy relevant he's going to be, but potentially a better best ball pick than like a, redraft fantasy league. But that is going to wrap it up for my top 60. Try to keep it somewhat concise. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. If you did, hit the like button, subscribe. Thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.